It was...
We weren't allowed any novels.
You weren't allowed any novels?
Yes, we were.
Well,
yes, we were.
no, they weren't.
Not on Sunday.
Recommended.
You were never allowed to read anything but the Bible or a religious book on Sunday. And our father, in this room, every Sunday afternoon, our father sat there, and we had little, there were 7 of us, and we sat in chairs and stools, and this was the dining room, and there was a big dining room table here, and it was always round that table that we sat, and the boys kicked each other under the table.
And you and Alec fought.
And Alec and I fought, yes. And then he'd close his eyes and close the book with his thumb in where he'd stopped, after perhaps half an hour's reading. And he'd question us all round, and Alec never listened to anything, but he had a marvellous memory. He never thought about what was being read, but he remembered everything that had been read. Do you remember that? And he could always answer the questions, whereas if we took our minds off it, that was it.
This is the family burial place at Inver Cemetery, Lochinvar, and it reads, in memory of Alexander McCaskill, died December 1901, aged 73 years, which means in fact that he was born in 1828, a long time ago. And our grandmother, Jane Mackenzie, who died 30 years after him. This was quite a usual thing, because men tended to marry women who were quite often about 20 years younger than them. And then we have our father, Murdo McCaskill, and our aunt Joanne, and our mother, who was also Joanne Mackenzie. It was also a tradition that McCaskills for generations married Mackenzies.
Our father was a very progressive man in getting things, and he got the first telephone box.
Always first with everything.
Yes, the first telephone box after the coronation. Coronation gift to the people was anybody more than 2 miles from a post office
Yes.
can have any community. So the first one was our one, and the pigs used to get so big and strong that they used to break down their sties. And the people who were all waiting for a handout when the pig was killed used to say, "Oh, it's terrible them killing that pig, and we've got to kill it," and all that. This time this big pig lifted the railway sleepers, and they just painted the telephone box red. And he went and he rolled round one side of the telephone box and rolled round the other and set off. And the old ladies along the road collapsed. Kirsty Beck fainted. Thought that the pig had escaped in the middle of being
Half dead. It was bleeding. Yes.
Tell us about that radio, being the first to get a radio. Like you did at dinner.
Yes. It was a great novelty, and in the evenings all sorts of people used to just descend on us to listen. I think they came for the 6 o'clock news.
Probably.
And that is at the state all evening listening to the radio, and there was a very, very poor reception. And I remember usually one of us had to hold an earth would be, or an aerial, the hand, to keep the thing so
Give extra.
could hear it going. It gave a great entertainment, I think.
And there were battery radios. Heavy glass batteries.
Acid ones.
Full of acid. And we used to have to carry them to Lochinvar and put them into the garage there to be recharged and carry them back home charged.
Did they have sheep and all that?
Yes.
Sheep was the mainstay of the economy. There was no money here. There was nobody in the 3 mile stretch from Lochinvar to Inverkirkaig. There was nobody earned a steady wage.
The
Apart
postman
from the
did.
postman,
Yeah.
who would get about £1 a week or 30 shillings a week.
And the man who maintained the road, filled the potholes on the road.
He wasn't from here.
Yes, he was.
Sprunt?
No, no. Our father did it at one time for a short spell, but
Yeah.
he...
But in fact, there was no money as such. They had to go away from here to fish for herring. Or, in fact, our father was a seasonal driver on the subway at one time.
Before he married, when
The
he was
underground
young.
in Glasgow.
What about
And so
your grand-
sheep was the main stay. They sold the sheep.
What about, how come all the kids, so many of the kids went away? I guess you might want to just tell how many kids there were in that family, your father's family, and what happened to them.
There were 8 of them. Our father was the oldest, and by law the croft went to the oldest son. So the oldest son was prepared from childhood to take on the responsibility of the croft. And the others, when there was a big family, there was no work for them, and they had to go away and train in something or find a way. In fact, I think your grandfather first went to Edinburgh and travelled for a company that sold tea. They used to have tea travellers coming around selling big quantities, large quantities of tea to the households in the Highlands, and I think in fact all over rural Scotland. And he did this for a time, but then he decided to go to Canada. I think he went directly from his tea travelling to Canada.
You said he was a really good student at Lochinvar School?
Yes. All the prize books here from that generation are, I think, all of them in his name.
Okay, so
The story, my father used to tell the story, our father, that his grandfather went to fish for herring off Wick on the north coast in the winter. And it was so long ago that tea was a very, very rare thing in the north of Scotland. It was being imported to England, and it was known here that they drank tea in England. And when our great-great-grandfather got paid for his winter's fishing, he bought a small quantity of tea and brought it home to his wife. They lived in this long building out here, which was the old house. And she had a friend who used to visit her a lot, and one day she asked her to come over in the afternoon and have drink a cup of tea with her. And they went into another room, and a man came in to call in our great-great-grandfather, and the man said, "Where's your wife?" And he said, "She's sitting next door with her friend Barbara, drinking tea." And the other man laughed and said, "Oh, nonsense, if she were," in Gaelic, "Oh, nonsense, if she was doing that, you wouldn't tell about it."
It's like smoking pot now.
Yes.
Yes.
Over here we have the Free Presbyterian Church, which was the family church for many years. Austere architecture, almost as stern as the sermons that we had to attend, sometimes twice on Sunday. We had a walk from Inverkirkaig 6 miles, round trip, twice a day.
My dad used to have a map
Oh, yeah.
with all
yes,
the
with flag
fronts.
following the front. It was very exciting for him when his nephews came from Canada during the war. He loved that. Your father came, and Bill's son, young Bill, he's now old Bill, but he was very young then.
Norman, you were guessing last time I was here and earlier today about how the McCaskills got here and how long they've been here. Can you comment on that?
Well, there's several asylums of thought in the matter. I think the most credible story was that we're all Vikings, Scandinavians, and when the Vikings couldn't find anybody else to fight with, they fought with each other. And the Ascrolls were supposed to be a minor group who came down with a longship after the others MacLeods had been established, and they were caught in a storm and taken by the MacLeods, who made them either their shipmasters, naval men, or their galley slaves, according to what story you want to believe. But they became the warriors of the MacLeods, and they were mainly associated with Skye. But the history of the McCaskills shows the McCaskills were never able to be underdogs. They always had to be. Gradually they became their own bosses. But as far as we're concerned, McCaskill is not a very common name up here. And the story that the people tell me further south, there are 3 points where the McCaskill settled: Melvig, Inverkirkaig, another point further north. And they say that one McCaskill came to Ullapool and he was convicted by common assent, I suppose, of being a sheep stealer. And he was sent to an island, which was quite a common punishment then. He was sent to an island, and as long as you stayed there, you were a free man. But if you came ashore, you were beyond the law. And a woman from Ullapool went out and joined him. And from that unholy alliance, we were told that the people went to Melvig, Inverkirkaig, and further north.
Very interesting. How long has the family been here that you know?
At least 300 years.
Wow.
Yeah, we looked at the gravestone today.
Mm-hmm.
Our grandfather, you're talking about our great-great-grandfather, our grandfather was born in 1827. Now our great-grandfather must have been born just after the Jacobite Rebellion.
He would be, yes.
Now our
And-
great-great-grandfather must have been,
Yes, just after tea was introduced to the country
tea wasn't
in
it?
16 something, the 17th century.
Our generations are huge steps
Yes, because
people
men were older when they married in those days.
married young wives.
And they married young wives so that they could have families.
Why were men older when they married in those days?
Presumably because they could only have one house on a croft, and if a man had his parents living with him, it may have been more difficult for him to get a wife. So his parents had to die before he had a house to live in, because the houses were very, very small.
We reckon today our grandmother must have been about 20 years younger than our grandfather.
That was the pattern then, wasn't it?
He had a huge farm. In fact, he had just a few little patches of land.
He built the first
And we all had
silo.
to work. He had the first silo in the north of Scotland.
Hmm.
In fact, that's a museum piece.
It is, yes. Maybe should do something about it.
And he turned
Such as
every patch of land possible.
Every patch. And drained every patch. And we had to gather stones, remember? We gathered stones off the land so that it wouldn't, when he sowed corn, the stones wouldn't make bare patches where the corn wouldn't grow, oats wouldn't grow.
And then we burned peat, turf, and each family had their own sections of ground where there was this turf, and we loved it. We used to go in the summertime. We would be away the whole day,
Have picnics.
and have the kids. We could play around for the
And gather hands full of little frogs when they developed lovely little things.
And it was always in good weather you went because they picked good days. So
The best tea you ever had in your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
The tea made it.
Mm.
It wasn't
Peaty tea.
always as peaceful as that. I remember one time we were sent to lift the peats.
That was less
And,
pleasant. We had to work then,
You and Alex started a fight,
as usual.
and we finished up by taking handfuls of the wet peat. So we spent about 2 hours fighting. By the time our father came,
We were black. Yes.
There was also a well that we got the water from when we were working at. It's about 2 miles out the road. And one time as kids we were sent to fill the kettles from this well, and our father had set up a picnic fire, and our younger brother, he must have been about 2, he fell into the well and churned it all up, and we retrieved him and brought him back, and of course they churned up all the water. Nobody was in the least
Drink.
concerned that he nearly drowned. It was, we had to wait about an hour for the water to settle before we could have our tea.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
How many people lived in the town, Lochinvar and Inverkirkaig together?
Norman, you?
well, when we went to school, when I went to school first of all, there were 15 children going from
This.
3 townships.
Yes.
Now there are half a dozen.
Yes. When Jean, the oldest of our family, went to school, she was 5, and she had to walk 3 miles to school and 3 miles back. And our father had read that children who lived a great distance from the school were going to be given transport to take them there one way, and they could walk the other way. Now, he and my mother used to take afternoon about in winter going to meet Jean and carry her home part of the way. So he wrote to the authorities and asked for the education committee and asked for, told them the distance and how they had to carry Jean, and asked if they could have a car to take her one way. I was coming up to school age then, and they couldn't carry 2, one person couldn't carry 2. So he didn't. He wrote several times to several meetings in succession, and he was told no. They weren't providing this sort of thing in Sutherland, which is Outland County. And then one day in summer, a man and his wife walked past the house here and along the road and came back, and the man came in and asked if there was anywhere that he could be provided with a cup of tea, if anybody here provided tea. And our mother said no. Our father sent him in to talk to my mother, and she said no, but I'll give you a glass of milk each to drink before you go set off. And he said, oh, we're so tired and weary after walking that long distance. And our father came along then, and he said he'd heard him, and he said, well, what do you think about our 5-year-old who have to walk all that way and back to school every day? And this man said, well, I'm the chairman of the education committee, and we're having a meeting next month on such and such a date. You send in another request for transport, and I'll see that you get it. And from that day we had a car one way in the morning, so that we got to school dry. And we had a long day and no lunch except carried sandwiches and cocoa, sometimes a little flask. And we got there and then walked home at night. It wasn't so bad walking home because we could change when we got here. We were always wet in winter, weren't we? The boys splashed us on the way home too.
But then when you became 11, you had to go in early in the morning, you had to walk both ways.
Yes. We left home at
Run both ways.
8 and we came back at 5.
But the other thing I remember was that we always seemed to be have cold hands. We'd have woolen gloves, but if they got wet, your hands would be very cold by the time you reached home in the winter time. And our mother wouldn't let us put our warm hands to the fire because she said you
Get children.
And she used to tell us to put our hands in her hair just to get body heat. And I often think now about her sitting there and all these wee cold
Yes.
in her hair, and she
Warmed them
sat
up.
there until
Then we weren't allowed to wash them in hot water either until we had warmed them up.
Somebody tell me about when Lochinvar School was formed.
Well, our father was one of the first pupils to attend Lochinvar School. Before the Education Act was passed, there were schools run by churches, some by private enterprise, where you had to bring a penny and a peat for fuel. But the school at Stratham was closed the term before he started, which would be what?
He probably went to school at 6. That would have been 1878.
So when was the first...
1876 was the Education Act.
72.
72.
The year our father was born.
So what did people do before the school was opened?
Well, they went to those other schools. The churches provided schools.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay.
It's there.
No, his batteries run out.
Well, you tell him.
Now my battery's doing fine.
No, when we were at the school today, I was going to tell you that your father was one of the star pupils. But also the reason the school is in that very picturesque setting out in the promontory a lot, because the landowners in those days wouldn't allow any land to be given which was of any use, value at all, so they had to build it out in that promontory. And in those days there was plenty of land in Lochinvar, for instance.
Plenty of land everywhere.
Everywhere.
They had chosen somewhere else, but they were refused permission by the man who employed our grandfather.
And grandmother, our grandmother dug drains for
Did she?
for 30 shillings a week.
Before she married?
No, sorry, a shilling a day.
Well, that was quite good in those days.
Glencanis,
I didn't know that. Before she was married?
I think after she was married.
Oh.
Mary, this home, this ancestral home out here, can you tell us a little bit about that? It looks tiny to me. The whole family lived in that little...
Yes, it extended right down to the road, and where our cars stand, that was all housed right down to the road.
Mm-hmm.
And it was yes, of course, all of our father's family must have been born in it.
And they were all
All
such
the
great
teens
big
when
men
this
before
house was,
they started building this house.
But the roof blew off the old house.
Did it?
Now whether that was, it must have been after this house was built.
Probably, probably.
But they came across the bay, and I can never trace exactly when. Because if our grandfather was born here, they're coming across the bay from the Rothschild side, where you can still see our great-grandfather's whisky still, what he made his illicit whisky.
Mm.
There's still the remains of. That must have been in the 18th century that they came across, which accounts for the fact that there's no record, baptismal record.
Yes.
Yeah, can you tell me about your great-grandfather's still? That seems to be quite a legend.
Well, he was reckoned to be an excellent whisky maker. You can still see where the ruins of his still. The problem in those days for people who made illicit whisky was that we get such torrential rains that if you require a lot of water to cool what they call the worm, which is a copper coil for distillation. And when floods came, they tended to have the whole lot washed away. But he must have been a really clever fellow, because instead of taking it off a tributary of a burn, he took his takeoff for the water was below a waterfall. So the more water came, the more it shot away, and he had a constant source.
Steady source.
What about fishing in the Kirkig River? And tell us about the Duke of Sutherland too, and his big house.
Well, Coolidge Hotel, as it is now, was one of his country cottages. And he used to come with his carriage and 4 horses. And old Flora remembers when the Duke used to turn his horses at the Tarrick.
Does
She
she?
said.
Does she?
And he would pick various places, and he and the Duchess would visit. And one old chap,
Houses?
he was having family worship. He was praying. Somebody came. People used to get very excited when the Duke came. And somebody said, "The Duke of Sutherland's here." He said, just tell him I'm talking to a higher man than him at the moment.
Good.
And they used to also go into the houses, and the Duchess, if she saw something she liked, she would take it.
Did she?
Mm. An antique.
What
Yeah.
about fishing in the river?
Well, the Kirkuk River gets the reputation of having of having had the finest salmon anywhere. It's only 2 miles long, and then there's a waterfall, and it seems a very improbable place for a lot of salmon, and among the biggest salmon anywhere. When we were young, 30-pound salmon were common.
Yes. There was a 135-pound salmon known to have come off.
Uncle George had 140.
Did he? Did he?
What about the one our father had done when Mother went to?
Yes.
Tell about that.
To take him a sandwich when he was fishing for an evening. She said she'd go along, and as she went along, the sea was in, the tide was high, and he was fishing a little bit upwater, and the sea came in over the grass as she walked past. A salmon came up and nibbled at the grass and in the water, the shallow water, and she leapt on it and caught it and threw it up the bank, and our father came down and got it and killed it. He hadn't caught anything. She was very proud of that story.
Yeah, I bet she was. Let's see, what stories have we left out?
Living here, an important part of the economics of living here was the fact that you were able to get as much salmon and venison as you wished, as long as you didn't ask for it. Because you got it illegally. It all belonged to the landlord, and so the deer come down and ate your crops, and the salmon were
What was it like to be, did you hear any stories about being so remote from big towns? How did they do their shopping and get their things with just a few horses?
well, we had a steamer, a ship which came in. When we were young, there was a ship came in every week or 10 days, which brought in the groceries from Glasgow. And before then they had a travelling shop, the Cormorant, which came from Orkney, and it called all the little ports, and you could barter. Bartering was a great thing here. You went to the travelling vans that came round and you gave eggs. But this ship used to take shellfish, lobsters, wool, anything you wanted to barter. And people said that it had aboard anything from a needle to an anchor. Do you remember it, Nora?
Then
No,
for clothes,
I don't.
it was mail-ordered catalogues, just as happens everywhere else. You could get virtually anything from a mail-ordered catalogue.
Then how did it come here, on the steamer?
By post.
By post?
Post, yes.
By post. Now, what about during your father, when did the first vehicles make it here and paved roads and all that?
We don't remember, it was before
Long time ago.
Yeah.
time.
About 1912, first mail car, which was a chain-driven car. Before that, it was a mail coach. We're 50 miles from the nearest railhead, and the coach used to go out one day and come back the next. with 2 horses, and then staging posts along the way. The passengers had to get out when they came to a steep hill to walk up.
But there was... Sorry.
After that they got the earliest motor cars arrived in the place. In fact, we were very progressive in a way. There was a local man had a shop here, and at the turn of the century he was producing recordings of local pipers and singers on cylinders, Angus. And some of the best photographs ever taken of the area were taken by Angus.
That was just
He was a
before...
great friend of your grandfather's. And when
Just-
your grandfather came here, he would spend a lot of time with Angus, who was an exceptional man because he'd never been away from here.
Yes, he had been in the First World War.
Yeah, only in the war, yes.
And a lot of people couldn't pay him. He was a local man, and the young men in this area had great fun. They had a splendid social life of their own, which they made without any television or radio. They had dances in houses and in little halls, and they had ceilidhs where they told stories and jokes and sang and composed poems about their neighbours and about their exploits. They had great fun. There was one old worthy lived up on the hill above us there called Murder Stewart, who was really an institution for many, many years. And your grandfather's family, lives really revolved around him, because it was always fun when Murder Stewart was. He never took life seriously.
What were some of the games that you played as kids? Was there any organised athletics or anything like that?
Not really. We had school sports days, but we didn't have what we call PT teachers, you know, physical training teachers or anything like that. And I think kids that were older were still have their own sports, but we weren't encouraged to swim. We didn't have any outdoor activities whatsoever at school.
Sliding on the loch when it was frozen in winter.
We didn't need them though.
No, I
No.
suppose we didn't. But it all probably sounds that it was very severe upbringing and that sort of thing, but it really wasn't. It was a very happy,
It
carefree upbringing.
sounds fantastic. Sounds a lot better than a lot I know about.
There was a lot of fun in it.
Yes, we were very happy as kids.
Apart from herding the cows.
When the midges were around,
Did anybody ever go up on the mountains?
We had to go up in the mountains to get the sheep down. And that cured us for life of mountaineering.
It was in those days inconceivable that anyone would ever climb mountains for pleasure.
Until I came here.
There was no such thing, was there?
We don't climb them because of they're there.
and we had a horse always. While our family was young, we had a horse called Charlie, who was really part of the family.
Old Murray Stewart said he was the most intelligent member of the family.
Yes, I'm sure he did.
My first job was taking gouty old army colonels and bishops up with a saddle. We had a Boer War saddle. And we had to take them up to fish, up to the falls and Loch Fuan. Go back, take them back, go up again when they were finished.
Where did
Go ahead.
where did that saddle come from? I can't remember it arriving, but
Nobody knows.
no. My father must have sent for it by post or by...
Where did all our rifles come from?
There were so many of them.
What did you think of all the family leaving to go to Canada and all of that?
It was a normal thing to do. That was what one did. One either went to Glasgow or Canada, not to Edinburgh or England or Australia.
Different areas of the Highlands had chosen places they went to.
Achildebuy, where you live,
They went to Montana,
Montana and Patagonia.
and
some of them.
Patagonia, yes. But mostly they went to Montana.
But your people went on contract.
Yes, and they came back.
They would go to Montana for 2 years.
Yes, if they were planned to get married, they would go and herd sheep out in the wilds, and many of them were lost in snowstorms.
But there's really no alternative for them. For instance, after the First World War, generally there were big families, and the house and the land would just go to the eldest son, and there was nothing left for the younger people. There wasn't any employment, so they really had no alternative. I think there was a kind of assisted passage scheme.
Oh yes.
that
Yes,
the
there
fares were paid, and then they got this, what did you call it, a quarter of land when they went to
Quarter section.
quarter section in Canada.
But I remember when the uncles came home. Do you remember the time they had the cask of
Stout.
stout? They were talking about them going out, as they called themselves, the half-crown settlers. They arrived in Canada with half a crown, and for the first year or two, the only job they could get was tying corn or wheat after the
Reapers.
reaper.
Yes.
And I remember your granduncle Bill saying that they used to be so desperate for food in some of the places. They used to kill a pig,
Oh.
take one of the pigs off the farm and secretly kill it in order to get something to live on. And then they got a quarter section, but very often it was wooded land, and they had to
Fell the wood.
fell the wood, burn off the stumps, and have it cultivated within, I think it was 2 years. At the same time they'd live.
Through
And
hard
most of them
winters.
started with sod huts.
Hmm.
And a lot of them went to Saskatchewan, where the winters are very, very severe. And how they managed to survive. Used to talk about having a rope
They all...
from their house to their barn, and in the severe storms they went along this rope, and they had to make their way back, and quite a lot of them perished within the few yards.
Yes.
And if they didn't have wood, it's a very serious thing, because the winter to contend with, and they had to spend a lot of their time carting wood in from elsewhere. But they all wrote home saying that everything was wonderful.
Yes. And came home and said that everything was wonderful in their adopted.
But you see, the
Country.
difference between Canada and here was the fact that they knew they could improve themselves. Whereas
Yes.
in the crofting system here, there was no way our father could better himself. He was stuck with a certain number of sheep. He wasn't allowed to have more. A certain number of
He always dreamed of the day when
acres of land.
he might be able to take on a farm in the
Do
east.
you remember the time, the traumatic time when he was on the point of getting a farm in the Black Isle?
Yes.
Now Jean says she can't remember that. And I remember, and Mary can't remember it.
I remember
Is it-
Mother telling me, Alec and me.
And he had £400 to raise.
Uh-huh.
He was so proud he wouldn't go to his brothers to ask for it, £400. And am I thankful he didn't go to the Black Isle, because this was so.
We would have lost this.
Oh, what was the Black Isle?
Black Isle is the most prosperous farming area of the north.
North of Inverness.
It was very flat and featureless.
Rich land. But he could, for £400, he would only have got a very small farm. But then he had sons who would have probably, you would have been all been farmers in the Black Isle now.
But before Mother died, my father was always an inventor. He was a blacksmith as well as everything else. He was a local vet, and he used to be called out at all hours of the night to attend to sick cattle. But
With some success.
his agricultural enterprises didn't make a lot of money, and our mother, I remember before she died, saying, I had 9 tourists to feed, and your father clinking inventions in the shed. He was always inventing a new piece of.
And always looking for perpetual
Our
motion.
mother was the first person to get into craft or small farm tourism, working in the north of Scotland.
In 1926.
She advertised, she had enough to furnish one room, and she advertised in the Scotsman and got 2 teachers.
For a whole summer they stayed.
No, yes, but they didn't intend to stay for the whole summer,
No.
because the railway strike coincided. Instead of having them for two weeks, she had them for
6 or 7 weeks.
7 weeks, and she never looked back. And she started feeding more people than she could
Oh,
sleep,
yeah.
and she sent them out to other houses, and the other houses then got into tourism. So she was the entrepreneur.
They didn't all get into tourism. They could provide a bedroom, and they came to Mother for breakfast, for all their meals. And she had 9 in her own household to feed.
I remember going on horseback down to the Lochinvar for butcher meat, and coming back with monstrous roasts.
Yes,
I mean, a piece of meat now that would cost a fortune.
yes.
And she had that. No wonder people came back.
Great big roasts put on the table for them to help themselves. It was wonderful way to spend a holiday. And all the cream
Heaps of fishing.
one could drink. And lots of fishing, and our father went to show them the best places to fish. And I remember him coming home, he and another man, coming home with 92 trout from the foot of Sullivan. He could hardly carry them home.
Well, Mary, was this considered did the brothers and people who left consider this the best place to be, but they just had to leave for economic reasons?
Yes. We had to virtually leave here to go to school for our senior secondary education. And if you wanted to do anything with your life, you then had to go away to Glasgow or something.
But they all came
So
back.
it was just accepted. And the people, but a lot of the families, they couldn't really afford to send their children away because there was a very, very small educational grant which really didn't cover expenses. And a lot of them just said, well, they couldn't do that. So these children, a lot of them who had a lot of talent, they just couldn't do anything about it. Stayed home.
A lot of it too was caring whether their families were educated or not. Our parents, our mother particularly.
Was everything else. He was a local vet, and used to be called out at all hours of the night to attend to sick cattle. But
with some success.
his agricultural enterprises didn't make a lot of money. And our mother, I remember before she died, saying, I had 9 tourists to feed, and your father clinking inventions in the shed. Was always inventing a new piece of...
They're always looking for perpetual
Our
motion.
mother was the first person to get into croft or small farm tourism, working in the north of Scotland.
1926.
She advertised, she had enough to furnish one room, and she advertised in the Scotsman. And she started feeding more people than she could
Oh,
sleep.
yeah.
And she sent them out to other houses, and the other houses then got into tourism. So she was the entrepreneur.
They didn't all get into tourism. They
Dolly and
could
I am-
provide a bedroom, and they came to Mother for breakfast, for all their meals. And she had 9 in her own household to feed.
I remember going on horseback down to the Lochinvar for butcher meat and coming back with monstrous roasts.
Yes,
I mean, a piece of meat now that would cost a fortune.
yes.
And
I
she had
think
that.
right.
No wonder people came back.
Mary, you were talking at the dinner table about what people ate and what they did here. What did the family live on? How did they live? What did they do?
Oh yes, well I can tell you that. We had cows and a horse, and we had hens and ducks, and for a number of years, every spring, we got a little piglet, just that size, and it was fattened up until about Christmas time. And by this time, it was practically one of the family, because it used to just run around loose. And as soon as it started coming signs that they were thinking of killing it off before Christmas, we would all be weeping and wailing and saying we would never ever eat a bit of it. And of course, it was always killed when we were away at school. And when we came home, there'd be nothing said except the pig wasn't there. And of course, within a week, we were gobbling it down.
Yeah.
So we had never known it. But we had usually duck's eggs.
Duck's eggs?
And they were huge, big eggs, because the ducks fed mainly at sea, and very, very rich yolks. And porridge or brose. And brose was simpler to make. You put the oatmeal and salt in a bowl and just added boiling water to the porridge. You know, you boil it up quite a bit. But we didn't put the milk on the porridge. At night time, when the cows were milked, the warm milk was put in little bowls, and in the morning it had a lovely cream on top, and you had your bowl of porridge and the little bowl, and you took a spoon of porridge and then dipped it in the bowl, and you had the creamy milk. I don't know why we stopped doing that.
That was a standard way of eating. I was remembering about the pig.
Hardly carry them
father-
home.
Well, Mary, was this considered did the brothers and people who left consider this the best place to be, but they just had to leave for economic reasons?
Yes, we had to virtually leave here to go to school for our senior secondary education. And if you wanted to do anything with your life, you then had to go away to Glasgow or something.
But they all came
So
back.
it was just accepted, and the people, but a lot of the families, they couldn't really afford to send their children away, because there was a very, very small educational grant which really didn't cover expenses. And a lot of them just said, well, they couldn't do that. So these children, a lot of them who had a lot of talent, They just couldn't do anything about it. Stayed on.
A lot of it too was caring whether their families were educated or not. Our parents, our mother particularly, wanted us to go on and be educated, but our father saw that his family and brothers and sisters had done extremely well for themselves by their own efforts without a great deal of education. And I think he didn't see that there was the same need for us. Yes.
Well, can you just explain quickly what an OBE is?
Mary, I think you were involved in it more than I was, so. It's a special honour bestowed on somebody who has done a lot for his community or the organisation that he's been involved in. And
Me to Caliph and Ned. And he said, how lucky you are to be living here. She was looking for an increase in her. If you have a pity, you can't eat scenery.
well, that was, yes. Well, it was a very happy life. And I don't think any of us would like to have had any different kind of childhood. Everybody was the same.
You were equal in poverty, if you like to call it that.
It wasn't
Lack
really,
of
we
money.
weren't aware of it. We never knew we had less than anybody
No.
else. We really used to
As
have
far as
more.
religion was concerned, it could be seen now as an oppressive religion, but to us, and we viewed it with tongue in cheek.
It was
It
really
was
so far
the
above
same-
our heads that we didn't
But
understand
everybody
a
was
lot.
the same.
Yes. But
You
the
didn't
other
see
thing was that we were really very fortunate. We were living here, we had total freedom. We had the sea literally at our door, we had a boat. We could do virtually anything we wanted. We were never restricted. I don't remember ever being told we
We had to
couldn't
work
go
hard.
to the sea.
And our father let us take the boat out regularly by ourselves. And he always gave us a warning when we went away. Woe betide you if you lose that boat. There was some wisdom in his philosophy.
Yes, he made
If
us
we'd
feel-
lost the
feel
boat, we wouldn't have
responsible
come
for
back.
it, yes.
Yes. And we never thought about it that way. It didn't
Remember
frighten
when
us.
they used to go out fishing and they had the distribution of the catch?
Yes.
Made the catch into equal shares for people. One person turned his back. Somebody else said, whose is this? That's Murder Stewart's. And that's the way they divided the catch.
And you boys used to tease the old men in
I
the
used to
boat,
pull
by-
the line.
and they'd pull them in, think they had fish, and everybody would laugh. There's a wonderful story told about our father when he killed a whale with a stone.
Yes.
You remember that? When it was following the boat.
I often think how easy it is to do that. You know, we going out in the boat, you can have the whales come round about you.
Yes.
They had ballast stones which they carried.
But they had very small boats.
They had them ballasted for sailing. And he said the next time that whale comes round, I'm going to get it with the stone, and he threw the stone out and he killed a young whale. And the mother whale went berserk and circled the boat on a calm night,
Yes.
and all the other boats were shouting, why are you in a wild sea? And we were all
No doubt.
calm
they were.
water, and they said that Murdo had killed a whale with a stone. There was a long silence, and then an old man said, put him ashore, put him ashore.
Oh, they had great fun. And so did we, with very, very little. I sometimes think that even our family had far less fun among themselves because they had record players and television and
We used to build huts, and we used to climb the trees. And if
You were the great tree climber.
yes. I always
we used
thought
to
that
hide
I would
when
keep
there was any
on.
work to be done.
This is the village of Lochinvar. It's the centre of population for the area. Population of about 300 people, but a very busy fishing port where thousands of boxes of fish are landed each week. The mountains in the background are Sullivan and Canisp, the two most dominant mountains. They are of red sandstone. The rocks you see around about you are the oldest rocks in the world, they claim. 3,000 million years old. Very hard Louisian gneiss stone. The hotel you see beside the fishing harbour is the Coolock Hotel. We started life as a country cottage of the Duke of Sutherland. He had a number of these throughout the area, and he came to do salmon fishing, deer hunting in the season. Yes, Lochinvar is a population of about 250 to 300 people, but they have 3 churches. This is the Free Church, which is a much more attractive church than the Free Presbyterian one, with quite pleasant architecture. This is the 3rd church. We have lots of churches with a small population. This is the Church of Scotland, the established church. At the turn of the century they didn't have an adequate Church of Scotland, but they were very resourceful, and a few people got together and they bought a church at Nairn on the east coast of Scotland, took it down stone by stone and sailed it round in a schooner, re-erected it here, and if you go over it minutely you'll find no trace of any damage at all.